Okay, so let's get started in chapter 3.
Alrighty.
Okay, so chapter 3, the first thing we're gonna talk about is economics.
Yep.
Okay, so the book wants you to obviously remember the meaning of economics. It is the study of how individuals and society are going to get allocated some scarce resources to satisfy their wants and their needs. So we're talking about like water, gas, food, those kinds of items, of course, that are scarce resources for the most part, right?
Yep.
Now, economics requires. Let's think of. Let's take a Walmart as an example. So for Walmart, we need 4 items, which would be the same items that are the 4 basic elements to produce goods and services. That would be we would need the land to build a Walmart on top of. We would need the labor to work there, manage it, control it, cashiers, and all that staff. We would need the capital, so we would need obviously money to pay for the building, the lease, the input, the signage, anything, the training. We would need entrepreneurial skills, which would be the business training required to make something like that happen. Now in Canada, we're known as a mixed economy, so we have goods, we have services, we make some things, we provide services on the other hand. Canada works on something called a price system, so we don't have a barter or exchange system. So there's parts where you could go to in other countries where you could exchange gold or food or items for other items. We don't do that here at all. So I can't call you and say, I like to buy your cell phone. You can have my, Hugo Boss sweaters. But right? So now in the definition for the examples of understanding the exam, so the business is the supply and the consumers are the demand.
Okay.
Okay, so you want to think of Tim Hortons as a supply, and you can think of yourself as the demand buying the coffee. All right?
Okay.
Okay, so now in labor is a really strong indicator of how strong your economy is. So if we look at China, they've got some very extensive availability of labor, so their economy is pretty strong, right? So labor is a strong indicator of the efficiency of your economy, and of course, you want to make sure that it's being utilized to meet the consumer's demands along the way. In most cases, when labor is efficiently used, it's always meeting the consumer's demands for the most part, as long as the item is available. The book talks about, our notes also go into talking about capital, and from Statistics Canada, it provides us some information how public and private companies and sectors allocate capital funding to big and small companies. So obviously you might have heard of Rogers cell phone company. So Rogers owns, the stadium, it owns a ton of things, owns a lot of venture capital items. So now Rogers takes some of its capital, puts it into a smaller company known as Fido, and now Fido starts to grow. Then Rogers takes some more money, puts it into another phone company called Chatter Wireless, and now that starts to grow. Essentially, they all belong to Rogers. Okay. Now, GNP is a gross national product. So this is what you are making in Canada. We're measuring your money. So if I want to state the fact that Gareth earns $100,000 in Canada, that's your gross national product. So we're measuring your prosperity and representing of you being a Canadian resident corporation, and it's within and beyond Canada. Okay. So now if Gareth owns a company in the UK and Brazil, I'm going to count your total money. So you own 100K in Canada, you own 100K in Brazil, and you own 100K in the UK. So you actually are worth $300,000 of GNP. So your gross national product is $300,000, not $100,000.
Yeah.
So we're measuring, and the reason why we're measuring you is because you're either a Canadian resident, you're a Canadian corporation, or a Canadian individual. So those 3 reasons is why we're measuring you into the GNP. The gross domestic product is strictly, of course, just $100,000 you make in Canada, and that's it. Okay. So GNP is good to exercise over like companies like Tim Hortons that have expanded into the Middle East, even the USA, Canada, Ireland. It's also in London. So Tim Hortons is obviously available in a lot of places. Okay, now there's a question on the exam for CPI. It is asking you on what is the amount of goods and services that are measured. So if I was going to look at your family and then look at 599 other families, so I look at 600 goods and totals of 600 goods and services purchased by an average family. So if I look at the amount of eggs, gas, water, shampoo, and whatever it is you buy commonly, I can qualify your family expenditure and say, okay, the average family in Gareth's area spends $2,300 a month on these kinds of items. So it also gives me an indication of the price trends, and also gives me a reflection of the current inflation trends as well. So I will kind of have an indication of where inflation is heading and what kind of price trends are acceptable for people. Okay, so there's a business cycle diagram that I'm going to have to draw out for you a little bit later. We'll cover that at a later point because I'll draw it and scan it for you. But basically, in a business cycle, think of it something that goes like a roller coaster, just goes up and straight down. Okay, so that's the mode. So the upward slant going upwards, we would call that maybe like a recovery in a business cycle. The top of that roller coaster, that very top height before it falls back down, we would say that is known as a prosperity. And if it falls down again, and the very lowest part when it hits the rock bottom, we call that a recession. And that if it stays there for a long time, then we would refer to it as a depression. Okay. So every economy has that same cycle. The roller coaster cycle goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. And the time that it goes up and the time that it goes down, those time frames can change from time to time. And if you measure from one top to another top to another top in those various roller coaster shapes, that difference of distances is known as amplitude. And that's a question we'll do in the back of the book later on. So that question will come up again, and then it'll make sense. Okay.
Yep.
So, so the cycle just kind of repeats itself over and over. Then what you want to understand, there's the primary interruption into the natural force of supply and demand. So supply and demand is really straightforward, right? So if supply and demand is happening, I can say, you know what, Gareth, I want to buy, you know, all the food that you're selling at your store right now, because that's the natural force and supply of demand, right? But now what happens is the government intervention is the government is the one that actually puts their hands into your pocket and changes the way you spend your money, because now you've got a different scenario happening due to some things that are outside factors. Okay, so if you got a check on Friday for $1,000, you could spend it a certain way if you had the $1,000 to spend completely, right? But what happens is if you get the $1,000 and then they deduct $200 tax, so now you're only left with $800, and then you get home and then you find out you got to renew your driver's license and a license plate sticker, and now you owe the government some money there too. So the way you would have spent the original payment of $1,000 on the Friday is now changing because the government has intervened to interrupt your natural supply and demand. So when we talk about like spending policies or enterprises owned by government, those are kind of like places like that would give you parking tickets, and they would take money out of your pocket again. Crown corporations would be, you know, companies that are owned by the government. So like LCBO, they're going to tax you on certain alcohol. So regulations are also kind of similar to like enforcement, like parking enforcement, where you're constantly paying and then paying fines. So you go downtown, you forgot to pay the meter for an extra 15 minutes, and now you got a ticket for $35. Right? So that's gonna change the way you were gonna spend your initial $35, because first you had it and now you don't.
Yeah.
Okay. So the chapter 3 also covers about subjectively how you analyze the real estate market. So what it says is that it's our real estate market in Ontario, for example, is very unique, and what that means is that we don't have any homes that are like each other. There's no actual physical marketplace where you can trade homes, like, you know, when you go to the stock exchange and someone's like, hey, you want to buy my piece of paper, you want to buy this like deed. There's some places in Asia that would actually walk around and say, hey, you want to buy the deed for my property, you know, shake it up in the air. We don't do that here. Here you got to go look at a house, and then your lawyer's the one who's got to actually transfer over the ownership. So you can't do anything, even if there was a marketplace. So we don't have that. The book wants you to understand that. We don't have the same products. Every single home is literally different from each other, whether it's the change of brick color, the style of the home, whether it's 5 inches deeper, 5 inches like thicker, whatever the difference is. No homes will be exactly the same. So we have a local market happening within a local market. So in Mississauga, for example, or even your area, we could say we want to look at Leaside, and Leaside is, you know, underneath North York, for example. So within Toronto, we got all these little local markets happening. So we got Thornhill, we got Mississauga, Square One. So Mississauga Square One is totally different from Mississauga, Pearson International, Malton. So those two areas are so different from each other. The clients are even totally different. The prices are totally different. But you're still in the same city.
Yeah.
But they're like mini cities, right? They're GTA cities. It's not even a mainframe city. So the way you look at it, it's a greater Toronto city. But there is a local market within a local market, is what it's telling us. And you got to remember that real estate is all about a fixed location, so you don't take the commodity to the customer. It's the only thing that you don't. So commodities, I can bring you gold, silver, oil, I can bring them right to your door, but I can't bring you the real estate to your door. That's the only one commodity that's going to be completely fixed. So market's not standardized whatsoever. With a slow supply-demand adjustment, you'll have high demand and you'll have an increase in the buildings. So most likely when the real estate market is strong, you'll see an increase in buildings of condos and houses going on by construction companies. Okay?
Yeah.
And then we cover something that's called a private transaction. So private transaction is if I want to buy your house privately, I give you the money, we go to the lawyer, we exchange deeds, and I take over your home. And the only thing is that if I want to find out how much you bought your home for previously, I can't do that unless I go to a registry office. So I got to go to the Ontario Land Registry office, then I got to pay some money, and then I'll be able to find out how much you paid for your home. So when it's not listed by a real estate agent, getting that information becomes really difficult, and it's unavailable unless you go to a local land registry office and pay for it. Okay?
Yep.
So the money economy, for example, is the goods that are exchanged for money and money that's exchanged for goods. We're basically just redistributing it over and over. I give you some money for something, and then you spend your money somewhere else, and we're just constantly just redistributing it. Now, the number one reason of why housing increases is family formation rate. So in this example, the book says that the newlyweds that get married, they need to get a unit of housing right away. Okay? So when there's an increase in the family formation, when more people start getting married, you're going to see that they're getting their own homes. So you're going to find that when you look at the months of, say, April to September, you'll see that the market is the hottest because people get married and then they go get a home, whether they rent or buy, whatever the case is. But you'll find that they'll want to absorb a unit of housing a lot faster because they're getting married. Okay? So now, if employment increases, or you get a great job, and you're getting promoted, and your wage keeps going up, and your salary keeps going up, you're likely to start preparing yourself to become a first-time home buyer. In that case, and if you're not a first-time home buyer and you're an existing homeowner, then you'll be more inclined to move to a larger home or downsize. So even if you were living, say, in Toronto, and you said, you know what, I really want to tone it down. I want to move into a bungalow that's way more expensive in a rich area in Oakville, now you could do that, given those circumstances. So what we have to always understand is that when the interest rate increases, the buyers automatically decrease. Okay, people are always looking to buy a home on a very decent interest rate, unless they're getting the home for a steal, unless it's some amazing price. But for the majority of the market, when the interest rates go up, buyers pretty much run for the hills. They don't want to buy anything at that point. So when you see, like as we're looking at a real estate market now, you can see construction happening by new builders everywhere, left, right, and center. Yeah. That's an indication of a strong real estate market for the most part. So it usually does mean that we have a strong real estate market with all the construction that's going on, because they're actually being bought up. So things are being bought up very quickly, right? So Central Bank of Canada owns the responsibility to oversee the financial system of the country. So they're going to set the interest rate up and down to adjust to making things run smooth in the economy. So they don't want to have they want to create a burst when it comes to the real estate market. But the demand right now that we are in, you can see that it's so strong, and we're running out of land to build on. So there's a lot of cool things that are happening in the sense of that real estate is becoming very stabilized, right? So there's three types of markets, of course. There's a seller's market, buyer's market, and a balanced market. So the first one is seller's market, and that's where a number of buyers will exceed the supply. Sellers market is great because there's low inventory, there's a rise in prices, and this is what's happening today. You have a hard time finding stuff, and if you're an agent working in this market, you'll really enjoy it because you just tell your buyers that if they're not ready to spend, they're not going to be able to buy. So then you have it a lot. You have a lot more negotiating power for yourself, and you can also know where your buyers are willing to go up to. So you're already in a place where deals can happen a lot better, and you don't have to wait till the end to find out that they want to walk away from it. So property sells really quickly. There's usually bidding wars, and there's usually people paying premiums for these homes, and that's happening even in Brampton and even in Milton. So it's happening everywhere. The buyer's market is where the property supply exceeds the demand. So there's obviously the prices are relaxing, they're going down. It's taken a lot longer to sell the homes. This is a lot more favorable for buyers. They can negotiate like crazy, and they usually do. They're going to push their luck. They're going to ask for a lot more than they should ask for, and they're going to take their sweet time to find the property that they really like because now they have all this choice to shop around. It's almost like as if you won a lottery and you could buy any car you wanted to. You'll take your time because you have everything at your fingertips.
Yeah.
Balanced market is the nicest one. It's the one we like the most. So number of properties meet the demand. Property selling within a reasonable time. The supply and the demand are like pretty stabilized. Sellers are accepting reasonable offers. The prices are very comfortable. People are okay with them, and then the atmosphere starts to become pretty relaxed. Okay. So you remember how we talked about that business cycle? We had the recovery, prosperity, and then the recession. So we can also create the same cycle for a real estate cycle. The only word we'll change at the top would be prosperity. We'd call it a peak, because real estate prices go up in peak. They don't actually, there's no prosperity description in that diagram. So when you have recovery, you'll have a peak, and then you'll have recession. So it'll be very, very similar, except for one word being changed. So in the real estate, it says in the book when we define the long-term cycle. So now it's driven by demographics. So age would be baby boomers, people changing in age, getting too old, and they want to move out into something, like a bungalow or a ranch. Marriage is a family formation formula that we talked about. So family formation, people start getting married. Long term, they're going to be planning and buying homes. Population is what we have going on right now. We have a very strong immigration system that asks you to bring in a lot of money or a lot of skills. So because of that, we're bringing in people that are ready to put down a ton of money into property, and that's making the prices, stay where they are. The government long-term policies, that's a macro, big picture scenario. So if the government opens up like the immigration to more wealthy asset holders, it helps our economy. And of course they invite students who have all of the funds prepared and ready to live in Canada. The short-term cycle is driven by interest rates, like when the federal government moves the rates up and down. The rates can change overnight, per se, right? Usually they don't do such an extreme change, but they'll make some reasonable time frame changes so people can get ready and get used to it. But there are exceptions to that rule. So general economic conditions would be, for example, there's a Ford factory close by, and everyone loses their job because they shut down, and that area starts suffering on real estate market value because people all want to sell because they can't afford it. But if they wait it out, and if they start recovering and getting jobs again, then at that point, the general economic condition would bring it back to normal. So it's a very short-term cycle. It would only be temporary. Okay. So we're talking about now tracking real estate like residential information through the real estate market. The first way to do it, of course, is through your brokerage files. So if you work for a real estate office that does a lot of, do you know what exclusive deal is?
Exclusive deals, am I right in thinking that's one where the buying agent and the selling agent are one and the same? It's limited to just that one agent?
Yeah. That would be an exclusive listing, or basically where an agent would list a property. It would not hit the MLS. It would just be with him. He would have a written agreement allowing him to sell it, and he would be selling it himself.
Okay.
And the reason why they do that, of course, they double up on commission, and they usually do it for a property that's already hot, and they know that they can find somebody to come and pick it up. directly from them. So it's definitely to do with a great property. Now, if there's some certain properties you can't find on the MLS and they've been sold exclusively in a certain area or pocket, then you'd want to go and hit the brokerage files to review them with the broker and try to find out how to do a price plan or pricing and also comparison for that property. So the best way to do it with that would be actually to sit down with the broker and find out how to price it. Sometimes the MLS can't give you those stats. So the second way to find pricing and market trends, of course, you go to the MLS. When you become a member of the Toronto Real Estate Board, you can do a CMA, which is a comparative market analysis, where you basically do comparables of properties that are similar, and you can price the new property that you're trying to sell, or even help negotiate for a buyer and show him why he should be paying that price. So now you can do that through a CMA. And other sources, of course, are things like websites that are like CMHC, which is a very awesome source. You should check out the website. This website will actually show you a lot of trends of what people are doing and why. And it'll show you things that most agents won't know, because it's looking at the overall way people are obtaining mortgages and on what locations, at what prices, what down payments. So it shows you overall strength and overall operational scenario of what people are doing in terms of financing. It's a very helpful tool, actually. There's also economic development offices like BDC if it applies to commercial, and you can also go to those offices and get some more information if you're tracking that market and you're trying to price or you're trying to find out the value of something, right? Okay, so there's a very easy formula here called sale to list ratio. What you do is you take the list price, you put it over the sold price, and then you divide it and multiply it by 100, and it'll give you the percentage. So in this example, I wrote that the list price was $174,900. The sold price was $170,000. So we divided them and we multiplied by 100, and your sale to list ratio is 97%. And you take this for the last 3 months to minimize the fluctuation of stats. The last 3 months is the most accurate way to do pricing. And the sale to list ratio obviously is a big helpful tool for your marketing, because if you went to speak to a seller and you said, hey, my name is Gareth and my sale to list ratio is 98%, 98.5%, and 99%, you're basically saying that, hey, I'm able to get you such a high percentage of your asking price. So it proves what you're able to do for them.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Any questions about Chapter 3?
No.
Okay, great.
Actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, just one real quick one. We're talking about the balanced market in a reasonable period of time. Just curious from your experience within the industry as to what a reasonable period of time is.
So in a seller's market, when the market's crazy hot, you can see homes selling within less than a week. Okay. And in a balanced market, if your average listing is for 90 days, average listing is for 90 days, right? 3 months. So you'll see that there's usually activity within the first month to month and a half. So I would say half the time is reasonable. So less than a month and a half, your property should be sold, inspected, all the conditions are met, the buyer's obtained financing, and the deal is now firm. And you're just awaiting the closing date. So reasonable time is a few weeks, which translates into, in that case, 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
So that's fairly reasonable. And we're talking about properties that are maybe, let's say, over $400,000, which is the average price right now.
Cool.
Good?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so I'll stop the video here.